Gaming has changed a lot in the last decade. In fact, the whole industry finds itself light years ahead from a popularity, monetary, and technology point of view. And while this does all sound great, the actual end products we've been receiving, well, have a lot to be desired for. You see, the quality and longevity of most modern games is rather questionable to say the least, and is why I wholeheartedly think the gaming industry can learn a lot from the brilliance that is Terraria. Before we jump into it, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of video. Alright, let's take a look. Despite not riding any crazy hype trains like Cyberpunk, or having a $60 price tag like most AAA games, Terraria still manages to remain relevant even when competing against the glorified shopfronts that everybody's playing today. And speaking of those, in many cases, games are a lot more impressive now in 2023 compared to in 2011 when Terraria released. But like most things, I'd say while we've taken 3 steps forward in some areas, we've definitely taken 3 steps back in others. Let me explain. In the early to mid 2010s, we saw a surge of indie titles blowing up and taking over the industry. This brought many classics like Minecraft, FNAF, The Binding of Isaac, and of course Terraria. Now, each of these reacted in different ways to their fame, some more greedily than others, but they all progressed in some way or another. Now, while these are all fantastic titles, and I'm not judging their entertainment value because of it, Terraria is one of the few that stuck to its guns and didn't release any DLC, microtransactions, or alternative versions in the 11 years it's been in development. I think it's safe to say the general environment of modern gaming finds itself dabbling with each of the 3 things mentioned. And that's not even getting into the fact Terraria has costed a measly $10 on Steam for as long as I can remember, whereas Black Ops 2 is still set at $39.99, and I'm pretty sure the multiplayer doesn't even work anymore. So with that in mind, it's absolutely no shock that Terraria has managed to maintain a spot in the top 10 best-selling games of all time. And with this, let's begin exploring the many aspects of Terraria that the industry can learn from today. So without looking at the bigger picture yet, we first need to focus our attention on the gameplay itself. The first thing that's always truly blown me away is the sheer variety of enemies featured in Terraria, with a total of a whopping 373 for you to go and discover. There's pretty much a taste of anything you can imagine, ranging from typical RPG monsters like slimes and demons, to fantasy beasts like wyverns and golems, all the way to completely fabricated specimens like sand sharks and sand tanks. What this diversity does is keep the game feeling fresh all the way from start to finish. It'll take you plenty of playthroughs to encounter each and every monstrosity this world has to offer, and this variety even continues with the bosses, especially with some of the new stuff. The utter range of boss designs throughout progression is staggering, giving you a plethora of unique opponents ranging from flesh-themed lifeforms, mechanical monstrosities, and even enraged royalty. It's insane to think how many games would benefit from increasing their enemy pool. Looking at you, Elder Scrolls and Final Fantasy. And while we're on the topic of variety, it seems only fair to mention some of the incredible crossovers with other games and brands Terraria has had, like one-drop yo-yos, Dungeon Defenders, and Don't Starve Together, just to name a few. This not only keeps Terraria in touch with other popular titles, but further increases the size of the toolbox we can play with. We've even got a crossover with Dead Cells coming out soon, which will undoubtedly add more weapons and enemies for us to encounter. The next thing Terraria just seems to nail that other titles struggle with is just general random mystery that you may or may not encounter while playing. Yes, I know many games have secrets, but they very rarely go into the depth and extent Terraria does. There is literally a hidden torch boss that's designed to encourage the use of the correct corresponding volume torches to increase your luck. It's subtle and impossible to figure out, but that's why I love it. It's very rare something is added to Terraria with no real thought and meaning. Everything usually is a reference or secret in some way or another. And don't even get me started on Shimmer, which is a whole gameplay mechanic that was introduced so sneakily, I'm pretty sure I would have never figured it out without extensive research. Finally, I just have to mention the complete flexibility offered by Terraria's class system. I've lost count of how many games miss the point of why classes exist in the first place, not to restrict and block off content for balance, but to give the player direction and synergy. While there's nothing stopping a ranged themed character using a sword or a mage using a whip in Terraria, it'll become pretty obvious that by focusing on one area, you'll get much more out of your weapons. And if you want, you can play as a jack of all trades, master of none, and still be able to beat the game no problem. A lot of this does tie into Terraria's masterful progression system too, which I delved into not too long ago. Now then, what is it that all the things mentioned have in common? They're all aspects I believe more and more games are beginning to lack. Recently, we've seen an abundance of titles sell themselves as wide as an ocean, but when it comes to the depth and thoughtfulness of what's included, it's usually as shallow as a puddle. So, we have to ask ourselves, why is this the case? Well, for starters, I think at least in the AAA space, a lot of companies are finding they can release unfinished or bare bones products to then slowly patch together with seasons or large post-release updates. Gone are the days of dealing with the here and now, instead giving us this whole "in 5 more seasons it'll be great" mentality. I find it funny how Terraria is supposed to have received its final update on multiple occasions, but each time without fail, the temptation of making it better always overrules. Whereas many of the largest titles have quite the opposite issue. They advertise so much, but we receive so little, and before you know it, they're working on the next game. Okay, with the basics covered, let's jump into some of the below the waterline stuff. You see, many games offer great gameplay, so why has Terraria lasted so long? So, I think it's fair to say that Terraria's long-term success is definitely shared with Minecraft. Being the open-world sandbox that it is, means even with years of content gaps, the replayability value is insane, and is what I think makes a difference from a game you play through once and enjoy, to a game you can enjoy forever. I myself have played through Terraria into the double digits, and probably on more platforms than I can count on one hand. The combination of a free yet structured progression makes for an extremely satisfying experience every time. And going back to Minecraft, while it's had its ups and downs, we can't deny that the sheer creative liberty offered by that game is unmatched, keeping it alive for 14 years and counting. And while it may be missing some of the progression aspects that Terraria excels in, it makes up for it in being, well, 3D, and having a closer focus on building. For the last 3.5 years, me and some friends have literally built a massive city called the Consortium because we can, and just because we felt like it one day, we built a 1-to-1 scale replica of Arcatraz Island, which we must have wrapped up at least 1,000 hours of playtime doing. So you may be wondering, why am I saying all of this? Well, simply put, I believe that giving the player the tools to do whatever they imagine, in pretty much any way they like, is the common denominator of hugely successful games of the past like Minecraft and Terraria. And while I'm not saying that every title should be strictly a sandbox, because obviously there's room for story-driven, racing, and competitive titles, I am saying that having choice and replayability needs to be focused on. I think in general, linear experiences are dying out big time. Just look at the Call of Duty campaigns. A decade ago, they were the big deal, and for a lot of people were the main reason you bought a COD. But nowadays, it's quite the opposite, and the majority get COD for multiplayer and Warzone, which is fine, but just makes me question how much longer it'll be till campaigns are scrapped completely. Black Ops 4 literally launched with Blackout instead of a campaign, and that was 5 years ago. So with all this in mind, all a studio would have to do is release another fully moldable sandbox RPG, and it'd have a decade of fame and glory, right? Well, not exactly, as although I hate to say it, I really don't think Terraria would have worked if it was released now. Here's why. Despite all the great things we can learn from Terraria, I can't ignore the fact it may be losing popularity in recent times. Having been heavily involved in the Terraria community this past year, and well, being a content creator, I have to say that since the 1.4.4 Labour of Love update, I have seen a significant decline in enthusiasm and just general discussion surrounding the game. I find it bizarre that a game with over 40 million downloads has had as small of an online presence as it does. Terraria tends to generate a good bit of hype during update time, but once everything's been covered on YouTube, Reddit and Twitter, it seems to go back in hibernation, waiting for the next one, which won't last forever. I would even say Battlefield 2042 has had more online presence at the moment due to frequent additions and updates. Just when you think it begins to die, something else pops out. So, I wonder, due to the nature of the modern gaming industry, is Terraria going to slowly drift away, especially if Relogic are going to take the next few years off working on what's next? I think it all depends on how relevant Terraria can stay while in lulls like this. If Google Trends is anything to go by, the game's had similar if not less engagement in the past, yet always manages to keep its foot in the door. Perhaps it needs to make some changes to fit better within the modern gaming environment, while keeping everything that makes it great. Could it be that additions like crossplay and a live service model could increase the player base? Crossplay for one would be groundbreaking if it worked between all major platforms. And luckily, we might be seeing console to PC crossplay sometime this year, as it's been teased as one of the final features Relogic want to add, but we'll have to wait and see. As for live service, this is a tricky one, as it's not always a good thing. A compromise between the two extremes would be better. Instead of releasing large content updates every couple of years, spreading them out into mini updates would keep the game alive and fresh for longer. The only consequence would be the lack of intense short-term hype generated around larger drop like 1.4. Either way, as mentioned in my previous video, I'd happily take any extra Terraria content, regardless of how it's delivered, because I know it'll be high quality. Whether or not Terraria will still be active in 5 or 10 years, I still think there's a lot modern gaming can learn from it. Firstly, we've got to tone down the greed. It's pretty obvious that the modern gaming industry has seen an extreme increase in monetization lately. These days, buying a skin, weapon or map for the price tag of an entire game from the past doesn't seem out of place. I find it mental that spending $18 on a skin in Apex can be justified when with that same money you could purchase Terraria, Undertale or Stardew Valley for nearly half the price. That's literally a choice between at least 100 hours of entertainment or a single cosmetic. I think it's also worth noting how successful Elden Ring has been, sharing a similar you buy what you get system. Yes, it may not generate as much dollar as Warzone, but it definitely develops a much more loyal fanbase who will definitely be purchasing their next title. So, wherever the industry is going, I truly hope upcoming devs will take a close look at what made Terraria so successful and apply the parts that we need most. So, what do you think about the gaming industry as it stands today? Let me know down below. This has been sockrteez, and I'll see you in the next one.